Sanibonani manene namanenekazi. Ninjani? That is even much better because from where I come from, it's very, very important to engage with you. In as much as I'm going to be taking this space to share with you some of my thoughts, but you're also part of this presentation. It's not my presentation only. So I want to thank all the previous contributors who have enlightened me while I was sitting down listening to them, and also to thank the organizers as well as my younger sister for introducing me. I've got a paper here in front of me. I'm not going to read the entire paper. I'm going to be taking snippets from the paper, and I also want to share with you some of the work that we have been doing at the University of KwaZulu Natal. But before I get there, something by way of reflection, and please do forgive me. I am going at some stage to be putting on my dark glasses because my son set on my proper glasses. So the only pair I had is the dark glasses that I'm because he took the decision to sit on my glasses, and the other pair is not for wearing in public, but I'm going to be wearing today. So, ladies and gentlemen, this whole issue of being human amongst other living entities is very, very important. Just want to reflect on what happened on the 2nd of June 1537, where the papal bull by Pope John Paul III was proclaimed. Now the bull stated that Indians, in this case the Pope was referring to American Indians, have souls. What a bold statement. Indians are also rational beings and they also have souls. And on that basis, they ought to be treated as human beings and not be enslaved. But if you are a human being, especially when you were raised in a particular African-centered tradition, which I will be trying to explain in a few moments, your very, very humanity is implicated in another human being. So to declare that another human being has a soul, being in a position of almost ruling the world, being a pope in 1537, is a very, very bold, but at the same time, arrogant statement, because your humanity is not conferred on you by any other human being. Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, as we say in some of the indigenous African languages, that you become a human being by virtue of your participation in a community of similarly constituted selves. So you don't need anybody to declare yourself rational. You don't need anybody to declare yourself a human being. I'm also very, very privileged today to speak after my very, very honored colleague, Kopano, Professor Ratele, because we also trained at the University of Natal, more or less in the same decade. He came slightly after me at the University of Natal on the Pietermaritzburg campus. So reflecting on some of my training, both locally and internationally, is very, very important. I remember when I was training to become a psychologist and to conduct counseling sessions. So we were told, okay, when you are sitting there with the patient or client, you have got 15 minutes to do the work. So you must make sure that you can see the clock. Huh? I don't wear a clock or a watch because I'm slightly allergic to wearing one, but you must always have a clock or a watch, and the clock must be positioned behind the patient so that when the 50 minutes is up, you can pack and go. Doesn't really matter. You must make sure that you can limit your sessions within that time period. In other words, now time takes precedence over the human being, the suffering human being in front of you, which is a very, very different understanding from other epistemologies of the world, where you cannot put time ahead of relationality or human relationships. It's a very, very odd way of thinking about the world, but nevertheless, that is how I was trained. And many, many others before and after me, by the way. So thinking about decoloniality or anti-colonial studies or whatever a term we may want to use, we need to understand that as part and parcel of our training, there has been what has been called in the anti-colonial literature cognitive injustice. There has been a lot of violence against who you are. Our entire training constituted a form of violence against ourselves. And right now, the time is opportune to undo that, to deconstruct and reconstruct the world in a different way. I mentioned at the beginning of reading this paper that I am going to be talking about Afrocentric traditions, African-centered knowledge systems. I do not claim to have a final and singular definition of this particular term. All that I'm saying is that from where I am standing, this is the terminology that I'm going to be using, but it is not meant to be exclusive, because indigenous Afrocentric epistemologies have never, in fact, been exclusive at any point in time, except if we are talking about indigenous knowledge systems that were propounded by people who never understood what they were talking about. Those who took only a particular understanding of Afrocentric tradition and failed to see the holistic nature of that tradition. I'm also going to be referring to Africa, but I understand that that in itself is a very, very contentious term, not because we are not in Africa, but we've got to begin asking critical questions. Who gave us the name Africa? He who names has got the power to control reality. You will remember, maybe some of you would have read the book by Robinson Crusoe, where he finds natives in a native land and he names them according to the days in which they were found. So you are going to be Friday because I discovered you on a Friday. So he who gives names to reality already controls the cognitive space, already controls reality, already controls the way that the world ought to be ordered. Many, many of us here have got English names because we had to have those names because we had to go to school. Without having that particular name, you were going to be dismissed. You would not be admitted in a Christian school or a school that was modeled along the Western lines. So I've already said a lot by way of introduction, but if I run out of time, and I'm sure this is going to happen, I want to introduce to us today a term which I think might even be slightly better than Afrocentric tradition, even though I'll be using them interchangeably. That term is Africology. What do we mean by Africology? Africology is the grounding of knowledge in African cosmology. It seeks to trace the historical contribution of African knowledge traditions from the cradle of humankind. It seeks to show that the current fragmentation and seeming incompatibilities amongst different knowledge traditions is untenable. So you cannot have an epistemology that foregrounds either or thinking. You cannot have an epistemology that puts human beings vis-a-vis nature. You cannot have an epistemology which fails to see that being male and being female are two sides of the same coin. Some of the violence that we are experiencing in the world today emanates from that particular understanding. I am a man. At the same time, I fail to recognize the feminine in me. You fail to recognize that you are part and parcel of nature, and the nature is in you, in as much as you are also implicated in nature. So that is the Africological tradition, to see how we can arrive at a form of wholeness or compatibilities between different knowledge traditions. So if I'm trained as a psychologist, which I was, or you were trained as a nurse or a medical specialist, there are many traditions that we are bringing here. That kind of training now, which locates you in a particular corner, cannot serve the needs and demands of knowledge and healing in the 21st century. We need now to develop people who can think about and beyond borders of knowledge, and I posit that the Africological tradition is a good starting point. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be drawing from a whole range of intellectual traditions to show that although direct colonial rule has come to an end, the former colonizers continue to have a major impact on the colonized or previously colonized subject. This process, which I have termed the coloniality of power, following some of the South American traditions, refers amongst others to the colonization of the imagination of the dominated peoples. Our entire imagination, the way we think about the world, the way we think about reality, ladies and gentlemen, has been colonized. We see this in many instances whereby, for example, my friend and colleague here, Kopano Ratele, was referring to the abuse of black women by black men. That results from the colonization of the imagination of black men, whereby they've come to conclude that a woman is something other than themselves. We can talk more about that later on. So, in order to move away from a grounding of knowledge that makes these kinds of distinctions, we need to realize that modes of thinking, especially Eurocentric modes of thinking, Eurocentric modes of producing knowledge, which puts emphasis on a singular, isolated, self-constituted individual, while ignoring the other as a co-contributor of knowledge production, contributes a lot to many, many challenges of today's society. I'm not saying that the challenges emanate exclusively from that, but I'm saying this mode of seeing the world contributes to sexism, to injustice, to ethnic divisions, the sexual abuse of infants, children and grandchildren by their own kin, human trafficking, whereby you look at another human being as a commodity and not something who is part and parcel of you. It emanates from this tradition of drawing a radical distinction between that which is me and not me. And once I define you as not me, and especially once I define you as less rational, as without a soul, then I can do whatever I can, because the justification is on the understanding that you are not part and parcel of the human and ecological community. So many of the injustices emanate from that perspective. I'm going to jump over a lot of sections. So, ladies and gentlemen, how then does this affect the university? Because a lot of knowledge transmission takes place at the highest level through the university. We need to acknowledge that modern African institutions entered this knowledge power matrix not on their own terms, but they entered the power matrix as extensions of the European university. In fact, you would have the University College of London in Africa, the American University in Africa, the American University in Asia, etc. So African universities were modeled on the West. They were assimilationist in character, thus encouraging various forms of cultural dependency. Mazrui outlines amongst these the tendency by African, I'm using this in a generic sense, by African intellectuals to despise their own cultural origins. I need to make a distinction here. There is a difference between a cultural tradition and something that has become commonplace because some people practice it on a regular basis. In isiZulu, we make a distinction between isiko, which is a cultural tradition, and umkhuba, which is a practice that has become dominant in society, which may be justified on the basis of culture, ideologically. So, all of those then bring about the reliance on European languages, which in turn were equated to intelligence itself. I'll talk and give examples to this later. The educated African taking power from the westernizer in the sense that access to public office depended on mastering the relevant European languages. And most importantly, Western education has affected modes for behavior and conduct. The pursuit of advantages as a result of the interaction between money and the economy and Western individualism and private profit has resulted in the escalation of corruption and greed amongst the African elite, thus eroding the core values of Ubuntu, or what was called in ancient Kemetic tradition Ma'at or Mat, which is the highest African indigenous law of coexistence. Ma'at meaning justice, respect, ethical responsibility, and moral righteousness. So, I think I may be running out of time. Where do we go from here? I'm just going to take one case of some of the challenges that I've outlined and mention one point in particular, that we need to understand that all forms of knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, are interdependent. All forms of knowledge are based on the tradition of what has been called the hermeneutic tradition. Now, what is hermeneutics? Many of us will be familiar with this term from the reading of philosophers such as Gadamer, Habermas, etc. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a very, very old term. Hermeneutics is concerned with meaning and interpretation. Even if you are having a patient in front of you, they may be sick with a biological affliction, but by the end of the day, what you are dealing with there is the hermeneutics of experience, the hermeneutics of sexual abuse, the experience, the forms of violation that has been visited upon that particular body will remain long after the healing of the physical scars. So we have got to conclude, therefore, that our work, healing, is about the hermeneutics of experience. Now, while hermeneutics is generally associated with philosophers such as Gadamer and Habermas, it has always been the preferred epistemological framework in the Afrocentric or Kemetic paradigm. For example, the late Dani Wadada Nabodere of Uganda, a lawyer, philosopher, etc., referred to the Uganda proverb Amagesi Sigomu, which loosely translated means no one has a monopoly of knowledge. Likewise, the Yoruba proverb states that there is no absolute way of knowing. Once you cherish the idea that your way of knowing is the absolute, then you are in big trouble, because you are going to lose the whole, the totality of knowledge for a piece of a puzzle that you are carrying in your hand. And now you believe that now you have conquered knowledge, you have got the totality of knowledge in your hand. That is a very, very problematic statement. So we've got to realize that there are many, many ecologies of knowledge out there. And in the academy, we need to open our doors and spaces to those ecologies of knowledge in order to arrive at a complete picture. Let me correct myself. The picture will never be complete. It will be complete temporarily, depending on the extent to which all the puzzles that were brought to bear at that point in time have been recognized. This is a never-ending dialogue of jointly constructing knowledge with somebody who may be different from you in many, many ways. The same thing applies now to the use of African languages in higher education or even in basic education. Let me share a particular, we are too serious, so let me introduce something funny. Now, when we were growing up, I had an older brother, 3 years older than me. We were trying to learn geography, you know, we wanted to pass, but being isiZulu speaking primarily, we were being instructed in English. And of course, my brother and I did not understand this thing. But there was an exam coming. And if you didn't pass, there were some lashes to be accepted on your buttocks. So I saw my brother one day trying to read a geography textbook saying, he was trying to figure out the process of rain formation. So he would say, come listen to me. Okay, referring to me that I must come and listen to him. First of all, the horizontal, then he would check his notes. The horizontal surface is heated, and then the warm air, where I am now, and then the warm air rises, and as it rises, it becomes cold. You can see now the violence that is being done. This man knows what he wants to do. It's being articulated, he is memorizing, he's engaged in what we call mimetics. He is not processing the information. We have had many, many arguments as to why we should use only English as a medium of instruction, especially in South Africa, also amongst the African communities. But coming from a tradition of the study of cognitive thinking, we know that the more languages you speak, the more diverse your brain will be and the more accommodative of other cultures and traditions will be, because you have put yourself in a position of opening up space for the other. But we also know that the very, very language that you speak contributes to the shaping of higher mental functions. So you are putting this gentleman now in a situation whereby he's not going to learn much, but he's going to be very, very good in memorizing, and as soon as he has left the class, he's going to forget everything. So I'm glad my old friend Charlotte is here, because at this point, you have seen I've chucked my notes away. I want to talk a little bit about some of the projects that we have been doing at the University of KwaZulu Natal to foreground the use of African indigenous languages for the purposes of higher education. This work is drawn from the work of the SANTED project, which combined many, many disciplines in the university: nursing, psychology, education, dental assisting. This is work that began in the early 2000s, mid-2000s. We continue to do this work to date. I'm going to be showing you snippets of this work. Unfortunately, I chose the work that we have been doing in statistics. I could have chosen some of the work that we have been doing in culture and mental health. So on that note, could I please have the following slides from the handbook? It's page, if you could please have page, oh, you have got it here. Okay. Oh, you can all see it. So this is some of the work that we have been showing. In fact, this is a bilingual textbook. Quantitative methods in the social sciences and introduction. Why did I choose this topic? When I was a student in the US, I couldn't help but notice that the Chinese, the Japanese, were the top students in the sciences. And then I said one day, I went to them and I said, please, can I study with you so that I can improve my grades in quantitative methods? They said, okay, well, you can come and work with us. When I joined them, I was pleasantly surprised to realize that their textbooks were bilingual. On the one side, there was an English version, but their intellectuals had translated the same work into Mandarin, so that if you didn't understand the work in English, you could also understand it in your language. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, education is about joint work. If I happen to understand something better in English, then I can use my isiZulu to explain it to my colleague and vice versa. So this is part of the work that we did. This is a team that contributed to this work. I'm not going to go through all of them. What we're trying to do here is to develop a handbook, bilingual handbook in statistics. I know that in the tradition in which we are working, there is the understanding that we should be using a lot of qualitative methods, and I agree. Why? Because we are building our knowledge from the bottom up. We want to be listening to conversations, not just an interview that lasts for an hour. Many of us work and we have an hours-long interview with the grandmothers in the rural areas. That is insufficient. We need to be engaging in bottom-up conversations. If that lasts for 3 hours, so be it. If I have to come back several times and have those conversations, so be it. But at the same time, let us not fall into the trap of believing that the quantitative tradition is a sole Western invention. The two have always existed in collaboration, and there are many, many communities out there which have contributed to the quantitative tradition in Asia and in Africa. I'm going to use a very simple example. Many of us come from the rural areas where we are building rondavels. That is a scientific concept whereby you know that the central pole vis-a-vis the extreme margin of the rondavel, every single point at the extreme margin must be equidistant from the central pole, isn't it? Otherwise, your rondavel is going to fall. But nobody in the way that we develop knowledge tries to use that very, very same understanding to teach an African child simple geometric patterns which are already embedded in the rondavel. It's so simple. Instead, we are told that this is a Western invention. No, 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 no. In indigenous African thought, knowledge is holistic. To know means to participate in the totality of knowledge. I'm going to use another example. This whole issue of changing the textbooks and writing them from a different perspective, and including everybody who has contributed towards the generation of knowledge in the sciences, in history, in medicine. Those of you who are in the health professions, for example, you would have taken the Hippocratic Oath. Where has anyone studied that to establish where it comes from, the history of that particular oath taking? Have we heard, for example, about Imhotep, the first medicine man in ancient Egypt or Kemet, from whom the Hippocratic Oath was derived? Well, we can contest this. I could be wrong, I could be right, but what I'm trying to say is that there is a lot to the history of knowledge that we still need to know about. The whole tradition, for example, let's say in geometry, for example, we are told that Pythagoras discovered the relationship between the various sides of a right-angled triangle. But we are not told where did that come from, when we know in ancient Egypt, 3,000 years before that, the people there had been building pyramids which required that the properties of the various sides be correctly proportioned Otherwise, the whole thing is going to crumble. So I chose the quantitative tradition because we want to show that we can give many examples. Many of you are aware of the baskets that people weave in the rural areas. They are not completely proportional, but if you go and study them properly, you will see that they follow a particular mathematical sequence in terms of how they are woven. So when we are talking about indigenous knowledge, we are not talking about the surface knowledge that has remained. We want to go deeper in terms of the scholarly study of those traditions and have a very, very good understanding in terms of how in indigenous African thought, your spirituality, your health, your education, your singing, your dancing was part and parcel of who you are. Many, many years ago, I had an opportunity to take sabbatical at Oxford University, and there I met a Zimbabwean guy. He was studying Dimbira. Dimbira is an indigenous Zimbabwean piano, handheld piano. What was he studying? The mathematical properties of Dimbira. You can Google that and find that work. Those notes are there in Dimbira, but these people are said not to have known any mathematics. So going back, we want to show that there's a whole lot that is not being done in the academy. Okay, I'm going to go through this very, very quick. I want to show you some of the work that we're doing. What we are doing there then with this work in quantitative methods, I want to show that we can develop indigenous African terms, have a textbook in both languages, where we are talking about variance, for example, which is a very simple term to somebody who understands the English language. We were finding that our own African students were battling to understand this term. Variance, to vary, ukuhlukana, amazinga okuhlukana. But why are students battling? Because they are not participating in this particular linguistic community. So we developed this. I want to jump to page 90. This book is written in such a way that you have got your English this side, you have got your isiZulu this side. You can take students to a particular program, like an SPSS program. In isiZulu, we indicate what is being expected there. The results are spun out by the program, and the students can share that particular results. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I want to conclude now. So I need to go back to my notes. What is the way forward? Ladies and gentlemen, we need to build from the bottom up in as much as we are building from the top down. We need to know that there is an urgent need to engage critically with the knowledge power matrix, introduce new epistemologies and worldviews in our curricula. And as far as knowledge construction is concerned, this calls for the epistemological deconstruction and reconstruction aimed at recognizing the totality of all knowledges in society. We need to acknowledge the heterogeneity of all reality, of the irreducible, contradictory character of reality. The late Dani Wadada Nabodere has referred to this as an inclusive paradigm that not only recognizes that there are diverse ways to the marketplace, but we also need to engage on an equal basis. Hence the call for the critical reappraisal of indigenous knowledge systems and all cultures. This requires interdisciplinary studies as well as transdisciplinary studies, which is an attempt to create new knowledge that goes beyond the current beyond the current borders. Knowledge that will be in the service of the total emancipation of all humanity, the total emancipation of all humanity, as well as salvaging our world at large. So on that note, thank you very much.